Well, welcome to everyone to the PyroLife International Symposium towards an integrated fire management. I want to say good afternoon to many of the folks coming on from the EU and the UK. Good morning to many people in the United States who are joining this seminar. And a happy tomorrow to folks in Australia and other places who are signing on from there. My name is Lucian Deaton, and I work with the National Fire Protection Association on our wildfire community engagement efforts and international outreach. Today, we'll have two speakers presenting on, I think, really great topics for this first in a series of webinars every Wednesday until late July. There are over 250 people registered for this webinar. And we're very thankful that many of them are on. There's some technical pieces I want to share first so you understand the platform. There will be two speakers. They will each be sharing PowerPoint presentations for half an hour. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of questions to be had after each presentation. So if you have questions for the presenters, please share them during their presentation periods. The chat function, which is on the bottom of your screen and then will come up as a sidebar, allows you to type in those questions. Myself and some other moderators will see those and collate them for that question and answer period. If it is easier for you to type in your own mother tongue for a question, please feel free to do that. We have the ability to translate it on this end. It'll be answered in English, but if it's easier for you to type in your own language, we're happy to accommodate that. This session is being recorded, and we certainly, during this, if you will be on social media and the rest, we encourage you to use that hashtag PyroLife Symposium, and certainly also find the social media channels that PyroLife has. With the recording of this, this will be shared as a blog on the blog platform for PyroLife after. Our two speakers this morning, Catalina Stoof from what I will attempt as Wageningen University. She's laughing. I got it right. Some things work. Will be sharing with us an argument towards a diverse approach for moving from fire resistance to landscape resistance, resilience. And she'll also be speaking to the value and the goals of this PyroLife effort. They tie very much into that, and I think will be a great explanation of what is trying to be done at this global scale. Marc Castellnou, who's the chief of Forest Fire Division and a wildfire analyst in Spain and Catalonia, will be speaking about megafires and the occurrence of them more often now in a European environment, in a global environment, and an effort to try to identify future scenarios for that area, how to deal with them, how to understand. We want to move to the next speaker and want to thank Catalina for her presentation this afternoon. Marc Castellnou is the chief of the Forest Fire Division in Greater Barcelona in Spain, and we'll be talking about the concept of megafires, a lot of research that I know he has done and seen on their intensity, how they're new in the European environment, and to identify future scenarios for that area. Marc, I want to ask you to please introduce yourself more fully, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. Well, not much else to say. It's about I am an incident commander. I work as a wildfire analyst, also in fire service. I also have been creating and making Costello Foundation grow and just keeping the business of the fire season. And today I am looking at the lightning strikes we are having outside our fire station, clearing some fires already. So I will be talking and already looking outside. So don't worry if you see me looking outside. I share my screen and stop the video. Okay. Let me know if you see this. You see the screen?
Yes, we do.
I thought I was going to present the PyroLife students and more people from Northern Europe. I didn't realize it would be that kind of global community watching today. So I didn't get the presentation set up from a science point of view. I just set up using the presentation we've been using the last year just to wake up some thoughts through our politicians and our society about what's going on in Europe and what should we expect from the fires the next years to come. So we are 2020. We've been in the fire season in Central and Northern Europe since February, and it's one of the extremest droughts we've ever seen in Central and Northern Europe. And fires are there every day. At the same time, in the Mediterranean, we are having really wet conditions since we have the North Atlantic Oscillation, just driving all the frontal passage and low pressure systems through the Mediterranean and having the Northern Europe dry. This happens in 2018, 2 years ago. It was the worst fire season in Central and Northern Europe. It was the first time we saw a pan-European season in terms of fire. We had fire everywhere, every country. I remember 23 of July when we had the fires in Greece, when 98 people died. In the human phase, we had fires in Sweden, we had fires in England, we had fires everywhere. So this year, it's again the same, but we are facing a new type of season in the south, which is the climate change season. It means we've been growing fuel at an incredible rate. It means we had tons and tons of fine fuels in our forests, but has been the hottest year in record. So it means we are greener than ever, but we have more dry fuel than ever in the middle of that green. So last year, we had some of the fastest fires we have ever seen. In fact, if we compare fires we had in the Mediterranean last year, they classified as the 8th fastest run compared with Bolivia or Australia last year. So it's there, it's at the top 10. But we had a dry year, so we didn't grow a lot of fuel last year. But let's say we had 19 tons of fuel per hectare. This year, we already have almost 40 fine fuels. And underneath that green fine fuel, that is the dry fuel, that once it will dry, we will go into one of the biggest fuel loads we have ever seen. And we'll see what happens. So we are in a new ground. And that's what I want to explain, what the concept, to make people, mainly PyroLife people, to think about what we should expect in the next years to come. So I want to make sure.
Mark, may I ask after the video if you can turn your camera on?
My camera on?
Yeah, for them to see it as well.
Well, that maybe can cut some of the connection. Let me know.
Yeah.
You see me?
Especially during the video. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to make clear, everybody understands my point about fire. This is one video, some of you have seen it, but this is a video from 2014 from a fire entrapment we had. It was not a bad year, it was not a dry year, it was a wet year. But once we get the dry conditions, then we get extreme fire behavior. And that extreme fire behavior was extremer than the normal and the average. But this is the kind of feeling we as a fire service have. I want to say everywhere in Europe, but mainly worldwide. We are losing in terms of fighting the flames. We had no option because we are fighting an extreme fire behavior that it's happening under the climate change scenario, which means we have extreme conditions, but we have a lot more fuel load because our forests are under stress because they can cope with the climate they are living through. So in terms of conditions, just think about a family. You get a salary, you get a cost of life. But if the cost of life or living it increases, then you cannot do everything you used to do with your salary. So you have to cut or get into debt. And if the salary decreases, then you have to go away. So that's what's happening with our forests. They are living in a landscape where they grew up, but seasons are lasting longer. So they had to spend a lot more for living in that area. So they cannot cope with all the crown they have. So they're reducing the green crown, they're increasing the dead fill. So there is a lot more dead fill in our forests, and the weather is extreme. So once we have fire, we have extreme fires. And that's what we can see everywhere, and those are the conditions. And in Europe especially, which is a crowded continent, we've gone from forest fires to a civil protection problem, like everywhere in the United States as well, but especially in Europe. The new events are unknown because normally Central and Northern Europe, like Catalina has said, they used to think they don't have that problem. In fact, they used to have it some centuries ago, but now it's coming as a new thing. And the other thing is that everything we do in terms of prevention, it's done thinking with the fires we used to have 20, 40 years ago, not now. So we do prevention to avoid lower intensity fires than the ones we have now. And climate change is driving all these things. So we created the concept of the fire generation a long time ago just to explain how we've been building the problem. It's a conceptual definition. It means the fires, big fires getting away was in the 60s. It was a moment when our society was coming from a rural society to a urban society. So continuity was the issue, and we had big fires because the landscapes, after centuries of being cultivated, was suddenly continuous. Right now, in Europe, it's almost 60% continuous in terms of forest. That continuity evolved through the years to a landscape that could create a really nice rate of spread because fuel load was increasing, and that rate of spread evolved to intensity. So fires over the years built from small fires to big fires in terms of continuity, then big fires in terms of continuity and rate of spread, then big fires that had a lot of continuous landscape to burn. They had good rate of spread. They can develop nice intensity, and then they went into the urban phase. We have two different types of urban interface. It means houses being built into the forest, but also forests growing closer to the traditional towns and cities. So both things that created the new problem, which is the fourth generation we call. Then we had those episodes with a lot of big wildfire happening in the same place, collapsing the traditional firefighting system. And right now, we can see an increase on that intensity, or what we've been calling the firestorms, or the process of the pyrocumulonimbus, all those things we've been talking a lot, and that there is a lot of science going on right now, but all this has been evolving. But you have to think that the traditional idea of fire in the Mediterranean, when we created the fire service, it was a problem of rate of spread and continuity. And now they are facing a problem of that rate of spread and continuity into the rural and urban interface. But in Central and Northern Europe, it's a problem of continuity. And they will jump from a continuity, from a dry year, once every 10, 15 years, to fires of fourth or fifth generation, which is what we saw in 2018 around Manchester, for example, or in Sweden. So complex of big wildfires having rate of spread, having intensity, and of course using the continuity they have. So if we in the Mediterranean are struggling fighting big fires evolving from the third generation to the fifth and sixth generation, then Central and Northern Europe will jump from the first generation to the sixth generation, which is creating a huge problem of understanding. And of course, it's creating the effect we all know. Yeah, and the effect we know is that everybody will try to invest in resources to fight the fire because societies has fear. They need to respond to that problem. And we will avoid the landscape management at the end if the one that is allowing, the landscape is the one that is allowing those fires to happen. So mainly in Europe.
Mark,
yeah.
there's a request. Yeah. If you can speak a little bit slower.
Thank you. I'll try.
Por favor.
I'll try. So, as a thing we should understand is that there is a conceptual problem of what's the challenge here. And the challenge here at this moment, it's a problem of full load through the landscape, because every time we try to respond to the problem from a civil protection perspective or from a fire service point of view, which is what we have in Europe, we build resources or we build our capacities, but we don't manage the landscape. So under a climate change scenario, the full load is building up and the intensity and the rate of spread is increasing. So the problem of the will and human effect, or the problem of the complex of fires happening together is just increasing. We are not having any effect on that at the moment. So it's a big challenge, and it's more or less what happened worldwide. But we thought initially that we will go having small fires, growing space, decades from years of, they will evolve to bigger fire of thousands of hectares, of tens of thousands of hectares. But 2017, it was a year. It was the year that we've been in Chile, and we saw the fires there, and Las Máquinas especially, and then we saw the ones in South Africa, but we saw the ones in Portugal. And the ones in Portugal, they create a really big nightmare. They grow in June, but especially the ones in the 15th of October. And those fires, they burn in October hundreds of thousands of hectares in one single day. And suddenly, those things that we thought were happening far away were happening in Europe, in the ever crowded Europe or landscape with a lot of history. Portugal is not it's not by chance. Portugal is the country that burns the most in Europe, but it's also the country that burns the most, and that get the most of the rain in the Mediterranean. So if you look Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal burns a lot more and it gets a lot more rain. But it means what happened really is that they grow a lot of biomass, but they get really dry conditions and hot conditions. So if you had the wheel and you get the conditions to burn, then you get the most intense fire. It's not what happened in my area, let's say Catalonia. Portugal can grow 11, 15 tons per hectare per year. In Catalonia, we grow up 1.5, 2 tons per hectare per year. So we cannot build up the fuel that much like they do. So if we look at Central Europe, I normally say that Europe is going to have a Portugal situation. Why? Because Europe is shifting from a cold winter and wet summer situation to a mild winter and dry summer situation. And that's exactly what we need to grow up full and have burning conditions. And we saw that in 2018. We saw that in 2019, and we are already watching that condition in 2020. And this is the scenario we are going to have. And we've seen some pretty big fires in Sweden already, or in Poland already, and those fires are confirming the trend. Then we will jump from an almost no fire scenario to the storm fire scenario with no learning experience. And it's a problem, and PyroLife is an opportunity to learn from the mistakes we've done in the South during the last 4 years and apply those lessons learned already in Europe, and without having the need for the northern countries to learn by themselves. Of course, there is a cultural issue in here. That means that the northern countries, normally they have problems believing that the southern countries, they know how to tackle the problem. But this is challenge we must have. One issue we should look at it is understanding our fire history. We do have fire history in Europe. We do have. And it's very well documented. The problem is that during the 18th and 19th centuries, the industrial age, we just deleted that history. But we still can find forests that are fire dependent in Europe. This one, it's one example. You can see that tree over there. It was born in 1596, had 18 different wildfires, and the other ones from 1878 for different wildfires. And right now, what you see there, they're managing a fire, because that ecosystem without fire will not be there, will grow a lot of brush. So keeping those type of fine open savannas, they are depending on fire. And we can find those in the Alps, in the Carpathians, and also in Scotland, in different parts of Europe. But understanding fire ecology, it can help us to manage fire, instead of not understanding anything and then focusing everybody to confront those big fires. This is Pedro Grande in Portugal, that one that killed 64 people in one road in 2017. So, of course, we now fight fires, but we should try to build up our forest knowledge and forest culture and fire culture we used to have. But we just deleted that after 3 centuries of almost just creating a farmland everywhere in Europe. So the overpopulated Europe of the 19th century, at least in Spain, we cultivated everything. Only 5% of the landscape was left as a natural forest. So we lost that knowledge in the last centuries, and now, after 1 century of bringing back the forest into Europe, that went, as I said, up to 60%, the fire came in, and we are fighting against those fires to try to protect our forest. But in the last years, what we found that we are no longer fighting the fire to protect trees. We're fighting fires to protect our people, our society, because those fires are overwhelming our societies and they are creating huge problems. So we've gone from fighting flames to protect a tree to mainly fight the fires to protect ourselves. And this is a huge demonstration of how wrong we got the policy in South Europe and how wrong we can get the policy in Northern Europe when everybody, after the first problems, is shifting the policy to bigger planes, bigger helicopters, more resources, and not managing the problem, which is the fuel load. So at the end, I think a graphic that Aldiver, a friend of mine, did from Australia fires in 2009. The problem is intensity. 10,000 kilowatts per meter of fire line intensity, it's a limit of our capacity of fighting fire. But if the fire can produce more energy than that, then we cannot fight the fire by any means. But that fire line intensity depends a lot on the fuel load. As you can see here, if we have 30 tons per hectare, so we go to 90,000 kilowatts per meter fire line intensity. But if we are around 10 tons per hectare, we are below that limit and we can fight the fire. Of course, climate change is creating extreme conditions that will create extreme fires. But if we don't have the full load ready for burn, you will not get that intensity. And that's why we as a fire service, we have said into Brussels, into the European Parliament, we said we don't need more resources. We don't want more resources. We as a fire service lobby, we don't want more resources. We want our resources ready. We want our people trained. We want our resources renovated, but no more than that. What we need is a landscape where we can fight fire. So we need investment on bioeconomy. We need investment on the management, but not bigger assets to fight fires. We will never be able to fight in a 60% continuous country, an overpopulated country with people. So we are a lot of people living concentrated in that continent, and we cannot fight. The issue of 2017, it's what happened in Pedro Grande. It was not a fire that did the fire behavior extreme in the noon. It did evening, and the same happened in Portugal. And we saw that, and that's the problem on the firestorms and the problems of those fires that do the big growing counterintuitive at the moment that it's not the moment. It means when humidity is going down where temperature is going down from 40 degrees to 20 plus degrees, and humidity is going up from 15% to 40%, it's the moment when Pedro did the downdraft. It was that fire created the pyrocumulonimbus, and then when the fire lost the energy and increased the humidity, it was able to create the condensation and collapse over the area and make the big growing at 18 kilometers per hour. It cuts the people. So it created that inferno at that moment. But we saw that in other fires in Greece, and we've seen that in fires in Sweden already. We've seen that and small moment of that in England. So that happens if the fires have enough energy to build those type of firestorms, pyrocumulonimbus, in atmospheres that are hot enough and are unstable enough. So in the last years, we've seen an increment of those unstable conditions in our atmospheres. So when our atmospheres are becoming conditionally unstable and the fires are burning, and under those conditions, they can create those firestorms and then create the big fire. And we've seen that in Portugal in 2017. But now we realize that we saw that already in Sweden in 2014. And we saw that in England in 2018. Almost the same week we saw that in Greece 2018. So that's quite a big jump for a continent that is learning to live with fire in central and northern part, but it's going from zero to almost everything. And this is a big issue. Of course, we can go, I didn't prepare the presentation today for that. You can go to analyze all the radius, the soundings of the atmosphere, understanding the levels of energy, but mainly just take it easy. So if a plume goes 3,000 meters high, it can create an Indra. But it's suddenly because the plume has enough energy, it can go 12,000 meters high. Every time the plume doubles, it increases by 6 the wind speed of the Indra, which is the wind speed that it's pushing the fire. So fire is creating its own conditions, and nothing we know is useful to predict that fire. So we can try to predict the fire behavior using topography, meteorology, and fuels, but it's fire dynamics that it's changing that fire behavior. And so suddenly those fire services will be confronting situations they don't know. They are not prepared for that, and they don't have tools to be ready for that. And those fires will have big effect everywhere around them. This is the evolution of the wind during the 15th of October 2017 in Portugal. That day we had the Ophelia getting into Portugal. It was tropical storm getting into Europe. Sometimes it happens. We expect the really high wind pushing the fires. It happened during noon, but then the storm left and the wind was decreasing. But at night, we had another push. That push of wind, which is even higher than this tropical storm, was felt everywhere in the country. It was felt almost 500 kilometers away. Every anemometer was just detecting that change, and that was the collapse of the plumes of those fires that day. And that collapse was increasing other fires and was creating a different condition. So that's what we are facing in a crowded continent if we don't manage our landscape and we put all our hopes over us, the firefighters, is that we will be confronting fires. We cannot do anything to stop them. And we will see more and more of those storms, because it is not that the continent is drying out, is the continent is getting hotter, but the humidity is there. So humidity and a lot more temperature, that's the greenhouse effect. You grow a lot more biomass. And if you have the dry period, then you get extremist fire because you get the conditions for that. And that's just an example of how that works. You see the wind speed of that fire in Portugal. That's just not all the stations, just one of the stations. You see in the red the wind speed, and in blue the relative humidity of the atmosphere. You look at the minimum of the wind. It happens at the moment the humidity is increasing. It means at that moment the fire that was being pushed by an Indra stops, because it was not creating an indraft anymore, and then starts the downdraft. That means the collapse of the plume, and that starts when the humidity is increasing. And why? Because that humidity is being pushed up to the cloud and is freezing to ice and creating the precipitation. So you need to have that humidity, and of course in the Atlantic wall of Europe we have that humidity. And then we have the two different type of fire. The fire that when you reduce the humidity, when you increase the humidity, they reduce the intensity. and the type of fires that when you increase the humidity, then the intensity just blow up. And those are the problems that we are watching more often in Europe. And then look at the picture in Portugal. Look at the cars. It was a disaster, but look at the trees. All the needles are there. If you've been in campfire in California, or you've been in Kineto in Greece, or you've been in South Africa, or you've been in Pedrauran, you realize that the needles are there. And those are pretty intense fires. And the same happening in Las Máquinas in Chile. Needles are there. What happened there? It's a really good example of flame attachment to the ground, because cold air is coming down by the size of the plume when the hot air from the plume is pushing up. And that has been, we maybe can see that in the video. It's a video from Chile, but it's not a nice video, but you see how that it goes flat. Everything goes really, really flat. And it's just spotting very well. There's not a lot of fuel out there. It's a gray area, but see how flat it is going. And so that's what really happened there. And those flat flames or flame attachment, it's nothing you can fight the traditional way of hose line with water of a fire service, because there is not a line of fire, it's a surface on fire. And it's a game-changing thing that we need to understand. And this is something that San Jose University with Clegg Clement are doing with the LiDAR projecting to the cloud, the plume of the fire. You can see the vertical wind going up with the hot air, but the cold air going down in the sides of the plume. And that's what it's just closing down the roof over the fire and pushing that fire to the ground. So we have a lot going there we don't understand. And this graphic is showing the same effect in Portugal, 2017, 5 different fires. And as you can see, when we have the blue peak of increase of one fire, then it goes down, we have the orange, it goes down, we have the red, it goes down, we have the black, it goes down, we have another one. Every fire is peaking at a different moment. It's like a piston engine moving. Why? Because one plume is drafting into it, asking for the others, and then it's collapsing, it's pushing the others. And that's fire dynamics, is what Guillermo Rein said. It's not about fire behavior only, it's about fire dynamics, it's interaction. That's why it's so difficult to predict. And that's why you try to simulate those fires, which is the left picture using wildfire analyst, you get 2 fires, but in reality, it was only one fire joining together. It was interaction of fires. It was not only fires behaving. And all this is going to happen in Europe, where we really have a really bad projection of increasing temperature. And look at that increase in temperature, how many people is living in there. So we really got a problem here. And it's a problem that fire service is telling already we cannot solve it. We need management to do that, because we can fight low intensity fire, we can fight medium intensity fire, but no way we will be able to fight those fires. Look at what happened in Australia last year, no way. So that can happen in the near future. And from the last 60 years, we have had an increase every 15 years of the deficit of vapor pressure. And that means availability of fine fuel. That's there. It means conditions are increasing and are building up to have not more fuel, but also better conditions for that full load already there to burn faster. And those things happen every time we build a high pressure ridge in the Atlantic, blocking the humidity from the Atlantic. That high pressure system blocking in front of Europe, it's calling dry air into Europe from the east, from almost Siberia. And this is creating those dry conditions to burn after weeks of drought in Central Europe, after 1 or 2 years or wet conditions or a nice growing conditions because it has been hot. So that's what it's building. It's building the pattern in Europe, and we should understand that. So in 2011, we thought, well, those conditions from the east happen once every 11 years. Now they happen every year, and they are lasting longer because the high pressure systems are growing bigger, and the melting of Greenland is creating cooler waters in the northern Atlantic, what are increasing the high pressure systems there and making that condition lasting longer. So everything is building up to extend the conditions of Portugal, northern, to France, UK, Ireland, Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Norway, and Sweden. And that's what we've seen. Finland is a little bit to the north, but we'll see what's the trend. And in Europe, we have pretty nice chunks of forest in that can burn. And that's a simulation using wildfire analysis on the Pyrenees. This is an island. It's a forest island in the middle of two flood areas, which is central part of Spain and central part of France. The Pyrenees are under extreme stress. There is more than 30% of the trees dying there, decaying, because they cannot sustain it, because conditions are changing that fast. That forest that was grown there 100 years ago is not living anymore under its climate. It's another totally different climate. So that forest, it's suddenly, it's under stress. At the very first moment, it has become continuous for the last 2,000 years. So this is creating the scenario in the Pyrenees, in the Ardennes, in the Carpathians, everywhere, in every part of Europe we have. So the traditional fires we had on those mountains, they are evolving to something with a lot more extreme fire behavior. So really what is happening is that the conditions we used to know, those things we know, which is our comfort zone, and where our classical decision-making is working, is no longer here. Suddenly, we are confronting things we know we don't know. We don't know how things behave in those droughts, on those long-lasting east wind conditions. And then we have to use science and models. Our decisions will be supported by models, but there is a kind of uncertainty there. And then there are moments that we use experience. Those are those things we don't know, but since we've been there fighting those fires, like our friends in England, they've been there fighting fire. They know how to fight the fires, but once every 10, 11 years, and at levels of temperature and humidity totally different than the ones they have now. So right now, we are confronting with experience things that we can only think using models. So we are confronting things we don't know, and that's the recipe for uncertainty, and that's why we are confronting all in Europe. It means we are looking at scenarios we don't have experience, and our models are not still adjusted because we don't have the data. So it means that in our scenario, we are in a potential scenario or an unstable scenario, and mainly uncertain situations. And that, in terms of operation, means that we should adapt strategies or adapt tactics, or just shift all the strategy there. But we are applying a keep on going, means buying more resources, trying to fight fires, but not looking at the big picture of the future and trying to understand what's happening. And what's happening is not only conditions are getting worse because it's a hotter year or drier year. It's that our vegetation is changing. And there is a kind of vegetation that is living and a vegetation that is arriving. And when you have something that is living and something that is arriving, you have an overlapping. And that overlapping is a build-up. And that build-up, it's what is carrying the energy there. And we have to do that in an overcrowded continent with a lot of interface, and everybody bring own property, its own value. And we have to think big. So we are confronting those conditions in a defensive approach. We are trying to defend what is there, but we have to think, and I want to push you to think that there is nothing we can defend. It means none of the decisions we will take will have an effect on the past. Every decision we will take will have an effect on the future. So it is a creative moment, what we have to do. We as a fire service, we are creating in our decisions the landscape of tomorrow. And that should be taken into account. It means it's not a civil protection approach, it's a fire ecology approach, the one we should take into our decision making. And it is challenging. And this has a lot to do with the cultural way we approach the emergencies. Normally, we have been approaching emergencies thinking about people lives, property, and then forest. That means every time an engine arrives, first of thing, it defends people, then it defends property, and then it defends trees. But when you try to defend, like in this picture, the house that are already being affected by flames, you are not fighting the fire. And if you don't fight the fire will affect more houses. So trying to defend 6 houses, we end up affecting 64. So we have to think different. It means we have to think in the cost of opportunity. And of course, in the cost of opportunity, it's more important 2 houses than 1, but it's more important 2 lives than 1. It means we've done that in a lot of fires, in a lot of services in the cities, or in traffic car accidents, or in train accidents. So if we can save 2 lives at the cost of 1, we'll do it. What we cannot afford to do is just to lose 2 lives to save 1. So that's the value we have to put above the traditional way of approaching emergency, which is fire service collapse. We should keep providing the service, and we should be able to keep responding. So we cannot to try to stop one fire affecting cities or houses of life to collapse of a service and not be able to provide any kind of service, because we have to think big here. And think big, it means being able to keep providing that service to our society. And looking at those fires, we understand that we have no chance. And if we have no chance, we will collapse. And if we have collapsed, we will not be able to protect anybody. So that means that we have to think in the common value, the common good. It means we need to build the scenarios and decide ahead. It's time, because it's changing. It's not a peak of a situation that it's happening now. It's a change. It's a climate change that is changing the conditions through the whole continent. The same is doing worldwide. But talking about Europe, it is bringing the fires from Portugal to the rest of Europe. And it's doing that fast, without time to notice. And if we try to be defensive, we'll lose everything. We have an opportunity here to be creative. But being creative means understanding fire ecology, and understanding fire ecology means education our society. And that's what PyroLife is so important, just to bring back that knowledge that through 3 centuries we lost, because it was there. And all the traditional burning and all the open savanna type forest, it was there, but we lost it. So climate change is making bigger the problem, but it was already there. The only safe way out of these is managing. The landscape is not investing in emergency. The decisions we make today are already what creates the future landscape. So if we decide to create a mosaic of landscape, that will help us. If we try to keep the continuity, that will play against us. It's not a defensive moment, it's a creative moment. And this responsibility cannot be carried over the shoulder of a fire service. We want to share it. And that's why we are explaining that to our politicians. But we need the support of science behind, because there is not a lot of data on that in Europe. And that's why PyroLife project is a welcome project from the fire service point of view. Thank you, and I will be more than happy to answer the questions.
Mark, thank you. This has just been an excellent presentation. A lot of the questions you've raised, a lot of the situations that you brought up are good ones for folks to have in mind, both for the risk that's there, what PyroLife is trying to do, and the future for fire risk, not only in Europe, but around the world. There is one question right now, and we want to get to it, and then do want to be cognizant as well that at the bottom of the hour, we will close the webinar. Pooja had a question about, and it relates to when you're talking about climate change and the perceptions of it, that the risk coming into parts of Europe that are not used to this sort of fire risk. How fire management strategies are adopted to changing climate, how fire management strategies are adopted to a changing climate, and how does it differ from country to country in Europe? A broad question, but do you see areas that are tackling this risk with climate change in mind differently, and maybe some that need a bit of a change?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question to ask. It means fire management has not been adapted to climate change in Europe. People is trying to, not to change, it's trying to keep the position we used to have, and trying to think that this is happening one once in a while, but it's obvious now that it's not happening once in a while. So we should adapt, and adapt means we should learn one from each other. The same way we are learning from the Scottish and the Norwegians to fight in the high elevation, the Pyrenees. The Norwegians and the Scottish should be learning from Portugal, Italy, or Spain or Greece how to fight the big fires. And because if not, we are collapsing. And our fire service, there's no forest service, it's a fire service mainly. If it's using everybody to fight a forest fire, we'll have nobody to fight a hospital fire or a traffic car accident. I mean, the traditional answer to fighting a fire. Okay, it's a traffic car accident. So if we need resources to do everything, and to do that, it means we cannot use all the resources to fight the fire. And we've seen that everywhere in Europe, fire service collapsing and asking for more help and using thousands of firefighters to stop small fires. So we need to understand the value of what's burning, and if it comes back, or if that part of forest needs to somehow burn to be able to grow healthier. All this, it's what it needs to be done. So before starting to think about management policies, we should increase the knowledge, and especially the knowledge of fire ecology, because we are not fighting the emergency. The emergency, it happens because we don't understand what's going on. And then we have houses, people, industry, everything affected by fire. But we should manage fire and allow those forests to regenerate and allow those forests to change. So, and we are starting to have that discussion, but it's still some people from the north used to see the problem like if people from the south, they don't know what to do, and now they're having that. Now they understand the problem, it's something bigger. So it's a lot going on. But of course, the firefighting lobby, which of course I am part of it because I am a firefighter, is using the opportunity to build over the conditions. But we need to understand that we should invest in bioeconomy. It means economy in our landscape to keep that mosaic, to keep that managed forest or diversified forest. So it's nothing new, but at the pace it's happening in Europe, it's dramatic.
Yeah, and an apology on my part. We actually have time for more questions. I was misreading my own clock. So this is a very good thing because a couple more have come in, and we actually have till 5:45 Central European time. One person just wrote in, and you're talking about the mosaics of land pieces. What mosaic do we create through land management, prescribed burning, other tools, to reduce the impact of big fires in certain climates? If they want to answer as well, they can. And it is good to bring in different voices, but we'll hear from yours.
Can you repeat, please, because I was listening the accident.
Yes. Someone asked, what mosaic do we create through land management, prescribed burning, other tools, to reduce the impact of big fires in certain climates?
Yeah, well, the mosaics reduce the impact, and not only reduce the impact, they don't allow the building up of the inertia of a fire. So if a fire has to go through a mosaic, it's having different types of fuel, it's having different indraft of energy, and then it cannot just develop that big and have that sustainability. So mosaics really work well in avoiding those fires. Of course, every landscape or every society should adapt those mosaics, but we should keep in mind it's not only a mosaic of farmland and forest, it's always a mosaic also of old forest, young forest, diversity of species forest that we should be able to create. So last year I was in a fire that was burning really well into a brush, but then it went into a pine forest and it stopped. Why? Because the pine forest is at the moment of growing, but it's not doing that the oak forest. So had been everything a pine forest, we had a big wildfire. Had been an oak forest, it's that mosaic we should keep it. Of course, prescribed fire is good. grassing is good, forest management is good, farming is good, but wildfire mosaic is good as well. I remember I've seen it in a lot of spaces in France or Catalonia, or even in Argentina or Chile, also in England, where the old fire perimeter of a recent year wildfire was the only way to stop that fire. So keeping that open and alive, it's part of the management. We should understand the landscape of the future. It means every time we take one of those decisions, we're creating a landscape that will be there in the next years. And we need to think how that landscape will help or not in avoiding those big fires. And so it's increasing the resilience and the resistance of the landscape, or it's decreasing that. So we cannot build landscape that depend on us to avoid the problem. That's the issue. If we are there, the essential part, then we are creating a bad landscape.
Mark, another question from Jose. He asks, he poses a thought to you. Do you have the feeling that fire services, have kidnapped fire from, and one key element in the equation will be working with communities? Notes that to be nice, the landscape management was made community-based, since the fire service focus is not really working.
Yeah,
really
good question. We should change the way we decide. The decision making into our incident command systems should be adapted. It means we are deciding as a fire service, we are taking decisions that are not affecting us. We think as an organization, to keep it this small, to show that we are good, but we should think and the effect in the ecosystem, how that helps to that community, that change. Is that change good for the community, bad for the community? Which one is the interest of that community? Are we fighting that fire just for the landscape view from the policy point of view, or are we fighting that fire thinking about the ecosystem? So we should include community into decision making, because we are a fire service. We are working for those communities. They are the taxpayers. We work for them. It's not the other way around. So when you decide in those common posts, and there is only 5 people there deciding, we should include the values of the people that are there. And that's something that it's on its way, but it's, of course, it's taking time, because it's easier to do things without asking. But of course, when you ask people, they need to understand what you can do and what you cannot do. And my experience is that every time we explain people what we can do and what we cannot do, then of the different options we can do, they can choose and they understand. What people don't understand is when you don't explain anything. If you don't explain your options and their options, then they judge you. If you explain your options and their options, then they cooperate with you. And that's something we must learn.
Great, Mark. We have another question from Rob Gazzard, who poses the question, do you think we are entering a fire paradox in Northern Europe? He explains this as an imbalance between response and prevention. What do you think of that challenge?
I understand the question. I don't know if we are getting into a fire paradox there. Of course, we are getting into a landscape paradox. It means the type of landscape which we were able to maintain the last 30 years under the conditions we had the last 30 years is not the type of landscape we can maintain now anymore. So it is not a fire paradox. The fire paradox is what we will be building up if we don't use this moment to adapt our landscape. If we use our fire service to keep our landscape the way it used to be in the climate we used to have, then we are creating a big momentum for the landscape to burn at once. But we are policy making point of view, we are thinking in a way of creating a fire paradox. But I think that luckily we will not be able to sustain it, and the fire will overwhelm us and change the landscape. The issue here is not if landscape will burn or not. It is if it will burn one day everything, or it will burn bit at a bit. And we can help that landscape to change day by day, or to hold it until we cannot hold anymore and then change in one single season. That's the issue. We've seen that happening a lot of places in the world. The lessons are there to be learned. People have explained them. We as a society, we have to take decisions. And it's our role as a fire service to explain those decisions. We can no longer keep saying, buy me resources and I will keep you safe. We know that's not possible. And we have to be just proud of our society and explain them face by face what's coming and what we can do and what can be done. So what will happen?
Mark, I do want to say, as we have time for more questions, a few more, that there have been a great diversity of questions, and we also, PyroLife very much prides itself on a diversity of participants. So if there are any early career scientists, practitioners, women especially, who have questions, please send them in and on the chat function, and we'll want to include them. Mark, there is a question from Paulo who, it's a very interesting one about another statement for you to consider what kind and extent of fire would there be in case humans were absent from the landscape, and thus not suppressing it or modifying the land use patterns for fuel loading. When you're looking at your models, how do you consider that of what fire would naturally do, and then how is that human piece affecting it? Can you have a natural environment?
Well,
Balance there, yeah?
That's a nice question and difficult to ask. From my experience and looking at the data we have, the fires we used to have doesn't look like the one we have. We have a lot of data since the 13th century. It means almost 900 years ago, about the fires we used to have. And we used to have open type savanna forest, pine and oak forest. So the big wildfires we had, they last weeks, but they were mainly burning grass. And if they were not happening, the shepherds were lighting them a long time ago. But that is not possible anymore. It is possible after some big fires and some management, then we've seen that. So the records of that 14th, 15th century with those fires lasting from June, July until October now are not possible in Europe. But we can, and we've been applying that on the Pyrenees, we can transform fires into management burns of 1,000 hectares or 3,000 hectares. We can do that. And that saves money from taxpayers, that creates mosaic, that increases resilience, and allows forests to regenerate more adapted to climate change. And it's not an extreme cost. It's only a cost of information of our society. It means that we, fire service, we have to explain, we have to expose, we have to show our decisions with transparency, and we have to be ready to ask our society to decide what's next. So, of course, what we are going through, it's new. It's new because it's a climate change that it's new over a landscape that we artificially created using the power of our society the last century. So it's about being smart and being creative. But I've learned through the years that uncertainty can only be fought using action. It means at the moment you do something, you are shaping the future and reducing uncertainty. If you wait, you don't change anything, and so you don't control anything. We have to decide. It's our generation opportunity, and I think we are failing.
Mark, there's a final question here, and actually brings in another one that also came in from another attendee. Carmen has asked, or is stating that you've pointed out what kind of research is missing, mainly in terms of fire behavior and ecology. She asked, what about the social sciences? Is there something that you find particularly pressing to research about? And even within that, someone else was saying that would you agree that the objective is to establish the goals of the mosaic that you were just speaking of, and then have the local community quantify them? So I think in that piece of working with local communities and looking at social sciences, what do you think is missing there that can be brought in and help with the research you're doing with PyroLife, with the wildfire risk in general?
Social science is something that it arrive and it will stay. And it initially we look at that as a side science because we, the operationals, we were the big guys in there. And now this is becoming bigger and bigger. And as I said, we are using some of the social science to understand how we can involve the society in decisions that will shape the landscape of the future generations. We tend to judge ourselves about indicators. I mean, surface, resources used, biodiversity, are things we can measure now. But that we have to create trust, because what will measure the things we are doing now is what we will have in some decades from now. So social science, it's what can help us to involve all this society into that. And one point that it strikes me, it almost 8 years ago, it's when we realized that when we were explaining our people in the media press, we are doing what we can to stop that fire. And the next morning, the fire had burned 10,000 hectares. The mental idea of people of what we could do was that we were losers. We were not doing anything. But at the moment, we were telling people that's what we will do. We will lose 12,000 hectares, but we will do that job and that other job because we want to avoid the fire getting into there. People doesn't know if the fire really can go there or not. People will judge us the next day. And if what we said it will happen is what really happened, they will trust us. And if they trust us, it means that we got credibility. And if we got credibility, then we got options to propose strategies or management different. The problem is that without credibility, you cannot build that cooperation of decision making. To create that cooperation in decision making, you have to be credible. And to have to be credible, you need to show that what you propose is what happens, that you're in control. So building up trust that comes around from the social science is what helps us to start the shift, to adapt our strategies, firefighting, into more fire ecology adapted and into more management adapted than and only staying in the firefighting thing. So to go away from the fear into the creativity, it means credibility. And that's the issue here.
Well, Marc, thank you. And unfortunately, as we come up to the 45-minute mark here, at 45 European time, we have to come to the end of this first webinar in this series. I think what we've heard over the past hour and 45 minutes has been really amazing reviews of what is possible, what research is there, and how this challenge can be met with PyroLife as a research body. I want to thank everyone for attending this. This has been recorded and will be put on the PyroLife website, so you can share it with others, show it with others. Remember the hashtag as well to share. There are some questions that have been brought in that we haven't had time for. Continue to put those into the function or email them, and we will look to answer those as a part of blogs that'll be on the PyroLife site. So this conversation will certainly not end here. It will pick up next Wednesday, the 10th of June, again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, European time, with the next webinar in the series. That will have Danielle and Analyst from Arup talking about the shifting paradigms to achieve fire safety inequality. And Adrian Cardil will be also talking about industry challenges. And that'll be next Wednesday. We hope you all will join that. And I thank you all for joining in today. I want to finally just thank the presenters, Catalina and Marc, for really giving great insight into what they see as these challenges. And we look forward from hearing from more presenters over the next 2 months with PyroLife. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Catalina and Marc. And we all hope you have a very good day.
Thank you, Lucian. Thank you for hosting, and thanks, Mark. And looking very much forward to seeing everybody again in the next webinars.